My name is Claire. I'm 32 years old, and the day I got married was the loneliest day of my life. You wouldn't know it if you saw the pictures. The dress was perfect, off-the-shoulder silk, ivory, timeless. The flowers were wild, like he said matched my laugh. The man waiting at the altar, Daniel, he was everything I had once prayed love would look like. Not grand, but solid, and I knew I wanted him. I just never imagined saying yes in front of a room that felt like a theatre set, missing its most important characters. My parents didn't come. They didn't send a text. Not a single message. Just absence, clean and final, like a signature wiped from a contract. And still, I smiled. I posed for the camera. I cut the cake. I made a toast. All while this small, quiet scream lived beneath my ribs. Not loud enough to ruin the moment, just enough to make it hollow. People whispered. Of course they did. Work, emergency. I said. They'll come to the brunch tomorrow. I lied. Even Daniel believed me, or at least pretended to. That night, when he wrapped his arms around me under our canopy of fairy lights, I let myself believe, for a breath, that maybe family was just optional. But the wound had a pulse, and it grew louder with each passing hour. I haven't told Daniel what really happened. That a week before the wedding, I sat on my childhood porch, watching my mother sip her tea without looking me in the eye. My father never even came out. She said something like, "It's not the kind of life we envisioned for you, Claire," as if love, real love, should fit their blueprint. As if being with a man who once waited tables, who then built his own company from the ground up, was beneath their expectations. They said he wasn't serious, that a CEO with no board is just a man playing dress-up. They said I'd always been impulsive, and they were tired of pretending I wasn't a disappointment. I think that was the moment I stopped being their daughter and became something else, a variable they couldn't control. So they didn't come. Not out of forgetfulness, not even spite. It was punishment. But here's the part I didn't expect. 2 months after the wedding, when Daniel's app exploded, after Forbes named him founder to watch, after a major healthcare firm offered a multi-million-dollar acquisition, I got a call. It was my father. His voice was all warmth and familiarity. "Sweetheart," he said, like nothing had happened. "Your mother and I were just talking. We were thinking of sitting down with Daniel. You know, family to family. This is an exciting time." I said nothing. He continued, "It might be wise to talk about structure, about shares. I mean, technically, your marriage links you, and by extension, us, to the business now. And you know how these things go. Family trust, legacy. It's not just about the two of you anymore." My hand tightened around the phone until my knuckles whitened. He wasn't calling because he missed me. He wasn't calling to apologize. He was calling because he thought Daniel belonged to them now, that I was the bridge to their profit. I hung up, and for the first time in my life, I didn't cry after speaking to my father. I didn't scream or argue. I just stared at the silent screen, feeling something settle in me. Not anger. Not yet. Just clarity. The silence that followed felt almost clean, like I deleted a corrupted file from my life. But it didn't last. A few days later, I received an email. Polite, formal, from a law firm I recognised. One my father had used for decades. It was masked as a family consultation inquiry, filled with vague suggestions about family equity planning, asset transition, and legacy consolidation. I sat at our kitchen table, reading it over a mug of cold tea. The morning sun had started to spill across the floor, lighting up the marble like a spotlight. But inside, I was cold. Daniel walked in behind me, kissed the top of my head, and joked, "Did I forget to sign something?" "Are we being sued yet?" I laughed. That soft, automatic kind of laugh you give when pretending nothing's wrong. I folded my laptop shut and told him it was just junk, because I wasn't ready. Not yet. Not to drag him into my family's performance. Not to ruin the stillness we had somehow built, this fragile home made of morning kisses and unspoken trust. But inside, I was unravelling. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan. My thoughts spun just as fast. How had I become a line item on someone else's balance sheet? How could people who once tucked me in, told me bedtime stories, fixed my broken bicycle, look at me now and only see a merger? I thought of my wedding day again. I remembered the way I kept checking the entrance, every 5 minutes, convinced they'd walk in last minute like a scene from a movie. I remembered how I'd set aside 2 chairs with name cards, Mum and Dad, just in case. I left them there the whole evening, empty, like 2 ghosts in the crowd. And then I thought about something that hurt more than anything. They didn't even ask how the wedding went. Not once. Their silence wasn't just absence, it was erasure. A week later, my mother sent a text. It was short, crisp. "We should meet. There are matters to align. This impacts the family's name." The family's name. As if I hadn't carried that name for 32 years, like a weight around my throat. As if I hadn't bent over backwards, missed sleep, missed school plays, covered bills they forgot to pay, all to protect that same name they now wanted to paste onto Daniel's company like a golden sticker. That was the first night I went down to the basement. There's a box down there I hadn't touched in years. Dusty, sealed with masking tape that had yellowed at the edges. Inside, every file I ever kept from when I worked 2 jobs to put myself through college. Pay stubs, receipts, letters, even my rejection from their private trust, the one they said was only for assets, not liabilities. And there was something else. A letter I'd never opened, from Daniel, dated 6 months before the proposal, handwritten. I had tucked it away the night he left it on my nightstand, too scared to hope, too used to love being transactional. I opened it now. "Claire," it said, "if you're reading this, it means I've already asked, and I hope you said yes. But even if you didn't, I need you to know. I watched you walk through hell and never lose your grace. I watched you fight for a family that never fought for you. You don't have to prove anything anymore. Not to me. Not to them. I love you. Not for what you survived, but for how you kept your softness." My fingers trembled. I read the letter 3 times. Then I turned on my laptop and I wrote back, not to Daniel, not to my mother, to the lawyer. 1 line. "This matter is not up for discussion." I hit send. I didn't cry. A week passed, then 2. And for the first time in years, I felt something like peace. Not joy, not quite, but a stillness. A silence I chose. Daniel didn't ask why I'd been quieter lately. He's not the kind of man who pries. He waits, steady and patient. Like he knows the truth always floats to the surface eventually. And maybe that's what made me love him. Not just his ambition or loyalty, but the way he never made me feel like my story had to be rushed or shaped for his comfort. Still, even in the quiet, I could feel a storm building, not around me, but behind me. It broke on a Thursday morning. I had just come back from my usual coffee run, chai latte in one hand, phone in the other, when Daniel looked up from the kitchen island with an odd expression. "There's something you should see," he said, holding out his tablet. I took it. On the screen was an article, a small one, nothing flashy. But the headline stopped me cold. Tech founder's family moves to secure stake in rapidly rising startup. Legal talks underway. They used his name. Our wedding photo. My maiden name, bold in the subheading, as if they were already carving it into the foundation of his work. I sat down slowly, pulse in my ears. They went to the press. I whispered. Daniel nodded. "I didn't want you to see it like this. I tried to get it pulled, but it's already been syndicated." The article was careful with its wording. No accusations, no confirmed claims, just suggestions, just enough smoke to hint at a fire. Quotes from a source close to the family. Vague references to premarital equity concerns and potential legal entitlements through familial trust lines. They were laying the groundwork, not for truth, but for control. And worst of all, they were using my name to do it. That night, I sat by the window long after Daniel had gone to bed. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I just stared at the city lights blinking in the dark like they were sending Morse code from some other world. Because that's what it felt like. Another world. One where parents didn't sabotage their own child's happiness. One where love wasn't a transaction. One where I wasn't a pawn in some grand strategy. I thought of every time they had clipped my wings, told me I was too emotional, too soft, not pragmatic enough. I thought of the time I was 17, crying in the school bathroom after my college acceptance letter came, and my mother told me, "Don't expect us to fund your dreams." They didn't want a daughter. They wanted a reflection. And when I refused to be that, they simply erased me. Until now, until they thought I could make them money. That night, I pulled out a pen and a notebook. No laptop, no screens, just me and the truth. I began writing, not a letter, a record. I wrote down every time they denied me support, every time they left me behind, every time they accused me of being the problem when I dared to want more. I wrote about the night I slept in my car after a college internship fell through, and they wouldn't wire me money because you made your choices. I wrote about how I met Daniel, how he offered to split a $12 burrito on our second date because he noticed I hadn't eaten all day. I wrote about the quiet shame I carried for so long, how I thought maybe they were right, maybe I wasn't enough, maybe I was impulsive, dramatic, weak. But the woman writing this now, she wasn't weak anymore. The next day, I made a call, not to them, to a friend of Daniel's. A woman named Michelle, a corporate attorney with a reputation for being razor-sharp and fireproof. I told her everything, not just about the press, but about the manipulation, the timing, the sudden interest, the pattern. She listened. Then she said, "We'll protect what's his, and we'll protect you too. But Claire, are you ready for how ugly this might get?" I looked at myself in the mirror that night, toothbrush in hand, and stared at the woman looking back. For the first time, I saw someone I didn't pity. I saw someone ready. "Yes," I said aloud, to no one but myself. "I'm ready." I didn't tell Daniel everything. Not yet. He knew about the article. He knew my parents were trying to make legal noise. But he didn't know the history. He didn't know how far back it went. How long I'd been their disappointment in disguise. How being their daughter had always felt like a job, one I wasn't paid for, but was constantly being evaluated in, Michelle moved quickly. Within 48 hours, she had drafted a cease and desist and sent it directly to the firm handling my parents' affairs. No niceties, no ambiguity, just legal fire, dressed in calm language. But the thing about people like my parents, they don't flinch at first blood. They don't come at you screaming. They whisper. They gaslight. They wear civility like armour and strike only when you look away. So, of course, they responded, not with a countersuit, not with escalation, with an invitation, an actual printed invitation, hand-delivered to our apartment in a thick cream envelope with gold filigree and my childhood address embossed on the back. Dinner at the estate. Just us. Just a talk. Love. Mum. I almost laughed. The last time they invited me just to talk, I left in tears and didn't speak to them for 6 months. That was when I told them I was applying for a non-profit position abroad, a career path they saw as social work for people too afraid to build real wealth. Still, I stared at the envelope for a long time. Something inside me wanted to go, not for peace, not for closure, for understanding, not of them, of myself, because some part of me still needed to know if they'd look me in the eye and lie, again. If they'd wear their silk smiles and pretend they hadn't tried to erase me from their lives, only to circle back when there was something to gain. Daniel didn't like the idea, but he didn't try to stop me. "You don't owe them anything," he said gently. I nodded. "I know. That's why I'm going." The estate hadn't changed. Same manicured hedges, same sprawling glass foyer, same cold air that smelled faintly of citrus and something unplaceable, like wealth preserved in wax. They greeted me like nothing had happened. My mother in pearls, my father in his usual grey blazer, sleeves rolled like he was preparing to perform sincerity. We sat. Dinner was duck breast with pomegranate reduction. It tasted like ash. The conversation started with pleasantries, moved into family memories, then veered, slowly, expertly, into concerns. "We only want to make sure you're protected," my father said, sipping wine like a sermon. "Marriage is lovely, but business is enduring." I let them talk. They brought up the article, pretending to be blindsided, said the lawyers must have misunderstood, said they'd been misrepresented. My mother even dabbed at her eyes once. I waited. And then, when their performance reached its quiet climax, I pulled out a folder from my bag and laid it on the table. Inside, timelines, financial histories, statements, emails, proof of their sudden interest. The trust they denied me access to for years, now quietly altered to name future generational assets pending my marriage. Even quotes from the very lawyer who'd drafted the article with their blessing. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I just said, "Don't insult me by pretending this is love." The room went silent. My father's jaw clenched. My mother looked away. "You think because I married well, I'm finally worth your attention." I continued, voice low, measured, "But you're late, and I'm not your bridge." Then I stood. I left the folder on the table. They didn't follow me out. As I walked through the front doors, I remembered being 13, standing in that same hallway after failing my first algebra test. My father had looked down at me and said, "We don't fail in this family. We don't make excuses." So I stopped making them. And now I wasn't failing. I was leaving. 2 days passed before they tried again. This time, it wasn't a letter, or a lawyer, or even a phone call. It was a post, a glossy, well-staged photo of my parents standing in front of their country house with warm, paternal smiles. The caption was curated to look like a celebration. So proud of our daughter, Claire, and her husband Daniel on their incredible milestone. Family and legacy mean everything. Proud parents, or next generation. They tagged Daniel's company, used our wedding photo, the one I'd never even sent them. My hand shook when I saw it, not with rage, not even shame, just this sick, tight knot of recognition, because this was exactly who they were. Public praise, private erasure. I stared at the photo for a long time, rereading the caption, reading the comments flooding in from their circle, people I hadn't spoken to in years. Congratulations, you must be so thrilled. Such a beautiful couple, or such a bright future. All lies, every pixel, every heart emoji, every so proud of you from people who once watched me cry behind a catering table, who never asked why my name disappeared from their holiday invites after I turned 25. Daniel saw the post minutes later. I hadn't told him everything yet. Not about the trust, not about the years of quiet abandonment, not about the dinner that felt like a final audition for worthiness. But when he looked at me now, holding my phone with that post on the screen, I saw it in his eyes. He knew there was more. "I'm sorry," I whispered. He put the phone down. "Claire, why are you apologising?" I couldn't answer. Not right away. Because the truth was tangled inside me. Old vines I hadn't cut loose yet. Apologies were my reflex. Every time someone crossed a line, I instinctively believed I must have built the fence too low. That night, I told him everything. From the day I got my scholarship and my father said, "I suppose someone had to take the public route," to the day I told them I was getting married and my mother responded. To a man who serves his own drinks, I told him about the voicemail I still hadn't deleted, the one I got the morning of our wedding, the one where my father's voice said, "Don't expect us there. Claire, we're not going to pretend this is a real match." Daniel listened without interrupting. No questions, no shock, just a quiet hand holding mine while I spoke. And when I finished, when all the rusted pieces of my past lay exposed between us, he said, "They don't get to use your name anymore." It was that simple. The next morning, Michelle filed a formal defamation warning to have the post taken down. The language was precise, a violation of privacy, misrepresentation, and brand interference. But more than that, it was symbolic. I wasn't hiding anymore. The post was gone within hours. No apology, no explanation, just vanished, like it had never happened. But erasure was their language, and I was finally done speaking it. Later that week, I went back to the basement. That same old box, same dust. But this time, I dug deeper, found photos, journals, birthday cards I had made for them as a child, covered in stickers and glitter, little girl handwriting that said things like, "Thank you for loving me." One of them, I noticed, had never even been opened. I sat on the cold floor for a long time, that unopened card in my lap. It hit me then, the most painful realization of all. They hadn't changed. I had, and I wasn't theirs anymore. I didn't sleep that night, not because of anxiety, not anymore, but because something inside me had shifted, like a heavy door creaked open in my chest and let a new kind of air in. The kind of air that comes after the fire, after the ashes settle. That next morning, I woke up before sunrise and went for a walk. No makeup, no phone, just sneakers and the long stretch of empty pavement that curved along the reservoir near our apartment. The city was still asleep, and for the first time in what felt like years. I wasn't running from anything. I was just walking towards something. Freedom. Maybe. When I got back, Daniel was in the kitchen, his laptop open, reading something with furrowed brows. I could tell it wasn't work. "They've filed something," he said without looking up. I froze. What kind of something? He turned the screen toward me. It was an official letter, filed by their lawyers. A request for mediation. Not a lawsuit. Not yet. Just the legal equivalent of a tap on the shoulder before the shove. They wanted a meeting. With Daniel, with me, with our counsel present. To discuss potential entitlements, family impact, and fair outcomes regarding shared interests. My parents, the same people who had disowned me in every emotional sense, now wanted to legally define what they were owed. They think if we sit in a room, they can charm their way into equity, I said softly, almost to myself. Daniel looked at me. We don't have to go, but I already knew we would. Not because they deserved it, but because I needed them to see what I had become. Not to prove my worth, but to close the door. Properly. Finally. Michelle prepared the paperwork. Her team drafted clauses, protections, documentation of their previous silence, their sudden interest. We were ready. The day of the meeting. I wore a simple black suit. No jewellery, no makeup. I didn't want to be untouchable or elegant. I wanted to be undeniable. The kind of quiet presence that filled a room without having to say much. They arrived together. My parents. Of course they did. Always a united front. Still clinging to the illusion of moral high ground. We sat across a long, glass table. Michelle on one side. Their lawyer, some smooth, talking man with silver hair and practiced charm. On the other, no one smiled. The first half hour was all politeness. Legal speak. Vague outlines about potential mutual benefit and family unity. I watched them avoid my eyes. So I spoke. "Let's skip it," I said. Everyone turned to me. I placed a small stack of photos in front of them, one by one. Each one dated me, at 16, working weekends while my father closed a fund and told me everyone should learn grit. Me, at 21, sitting alone at my college graduation because they had gone to Europe on business. Me, at 29, with Daniel in our first apartment. No furniture, just a mattress and his laptop, building a life they never cared to see. This isn't about equity, I said. It's about ego. It's about owning something you didn't build. My mother's face tightened. My father cleared his throat, but said nothing. You disowned me the second I stopped being a reflection of you. I continued, my voice steady. Now that there's money, now that there's recognition, you want in. But this company, this life, this marriage, you're not part of it. Their lawyer opened his mouth, but I didn't let him speak. I turned to Michelle. We're done here. And just like that, I stood. They didn't try to stop me. As I walked out, I felt something I hadn't expected: lightness. Like a rope had finally snapped, one I didn't realise was still wrapped around my throat. That evening, Daniel and I sat on the rooftop of our building, wrapped in a blanket, watching the skyline turn gold. You okay? He asked. I nodded. More than okay. He kissed my forehead. It's over. But I wasn't so sure. Because people like them, they don't take silence as an answer. They take it as an invitation to push harder. But I was ready for that too. Because now, for the first time in my life, I wasn't scared of being alone. I was scared of ever letting them back in. I thought, walking away from that table would feel like the end. I thought, once I looked them in the eye and said no, calmly, completely, they would finally see that the door was shut. But they didn't walk away. Not really. People like my parents don't take rejection as final. They take it as a challenge, as something they can fix with strategy and persistence. 3 days later, it started. Not through them, through others, old family friends, colleagues, people I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly reached out. Polite messages, concerned tones, casual mentions of my strained relationship with my parents. I ran into your mom at a gala. She seemed heartbroken. Your dad told me he just wants peace. Maybe you should talk. Family is complicated, Claire. Don't let business get in the way of love. Love. Where was that love when I was 19, sitting in a hospital waiting room alone because my mother said she had a luncheon she couldn't miss? Where was that love when I was 24 and told them I was struggling with anxiety? Only to be told, that's just weakness with a prettier name. I didn't respond to the messages. I didn't explain, because explaining felt like begging, and I was done begging for people to see what was right in front of them. Daniel noticed the shift in me. I think he thought I'd feel lighter after the meeting. But instead, I felt raw, like a wound had been reopened, not closed. One night, I found myself standing in our hallway, staring at my wedding dress. I'd had it cleaned, preserved, folded in a box with a little satin ribbon. I thought I would feel joy when I saw it again. Instead, I felt a sting, because all I could remember was looking into that crowd of smiling strangers and seeing 2 empty chairs. 2 chairs that had stayed empty, not just that day, but for years. That was the night I opened the USB drive. It had been sitting in my desk drawer for months. A gift from my aunt after the wedding. I'd forgotten about it. She'd always been a quiet presence at family gatherings, never one to get involved. But now I was ready to hear whatever truth she tried to give me. Inside were files, scans of letters, financial statements, one recording, and one document that stopped me cold. A trust agreement, rewritten 6 months before the wedding. It listed my name. And Daniel's company, not by coincidence, but explicitly as part of a projected asset review strategy. I scrolled down, and there, in my father's handwriting, his signature. They hadn't just shown up late. They had planned this, all of it. Even before I walked down the aisle, they had been preparing their claim. I closed my laptop and stared at the wall. My breath was shallow. My pulse throbbed in my ears. Not because I was shocked, but because some part of me had always known. The next morning, I drove. No plan, just motion. I ended up in front of a small stone house on the edge of a lake, 2 hours from the city. My aunt's house. She opened the door like she'd been expecting me. "I figured it'd be this week," she said quietly. "You found it, didn't you?" I nodded. She let me in without a word. Made tea. Sat across from me like someone who understood grief when it didn't come with a funeral. "They've always been like this," she said finally. "Performers. Strategic. Charming when it suits them. I stayed close because I hoped, maybe if I stayed, I could be a buffer." I looked at her. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" She sighed. "Because you were still hoping, and you can't save someone from a fantasy they're not ready to leave." I didn't cry. Not then. But later that night, alone in the guest room, I stood by the window and let the tears come. Not loud, not broken, just soft, exhausted waves of grief. not for what I'd lost, for what I'd never had to begin with. I stayed at my aunt's lake house for 3 days. No calls, no emails, just the sound of water lapping against the shore and the whisper of wind in the trees. And for once, a silence that didn't ache. I think I needed to sit in that stillness, to feel the weight of the truth, finally unburied, because for years I'd been carrying a version of my parents that never existed, loving the idea of who they could be, not the people they were. And now that the mask had shattered, I didn't feel empty. I felt free. On the second day, I walked down to the dock with my aunt. We didn't talk much, just sat on the edge, legs dangling, eyes on the glassy water. She handed me an old Polaroid. It was a photo of me at 6 years old, missing teeth, wild curls, clutching a handmade sign that said, "Welcome home." Daddy. He'd been gone on a business trip for 2 weeks. I remembered waiting at the window, holding that sign, heart pounding. He never came in the front door. He went straight to his office, closed the door behind him. I stood there for an hour before my mum told me to be quiet. He's tired. Looking at the photo now, I didn't feel sad for that little girl. I felt protective. She had waited long enough. That night, I called Daniel. I told him everything about the trust document, the recording, the layers of manipulation that stretched back years, farther than he'd ever imagined. He didn't ask why I hadn't told him sooner. He just said, "Whatever you want to do next. Claire, I'm with you." So I came home. Not just to the apartment, to myself. I called Michelle the next morning. We didn't talk legal strategy. I just asked one question. If I wanted to cut them off completely, not just emotionally, but legally, financially, publicly, could we do it? She paused. Absolutely. But once we do, it's permanent. You won't be able to reverse it without them having leverage. I thought about that. Let it settle in. Permanent. Was I ready to be orphaned by choice? I looked around the room. The walls we'd painted ourselves. The bookshelf Daniel had built for me. The messy bowl of keys by the door. The photo of us from the honeymoon. Sunburned, laughing, blurry. This was my family now. And I would not let the people who couldn't show up for my joy now claim a seat at my table when the feast was full. Do it, I said. Michelle didn't ask again. Within a week, everything was filed. They were locked out of any stake, any rights, any future use of my name or Daniel's. We issued a quiet press statement. Neutral, factual, firm, just enough to close the loop. And that should have been the end. But endings, I've learned, don't come in big, dramatic moments. They come quietly, like the moment you stop waiting for an apology that will never arrive, or the moment you hear their name and feel nothing. It happened a few nights later. Daniel and I were at a small dinner with friends, people who didn't know the full history, who didn't care about family pedigrees or trust funds, just people who liked us. For us, someone mentioned the article from months ago, the one that first named Daniel as the next big founder to watch. "Oh, right," a friend said, laughing. "Wasn't there some drama with your in-laws or something?" Daniel looked at me. I smiled. There was, I said simply, "But it's resolved now." And it was. Because I was no longer their daughter. Their investment, their project, their legacy. I was just Claire. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. You'd think once it was over, Once the legal doors slammed shut and the public silence stretched long, that the ghosts would stop knocking. But they didn't. They just changed form. Emails came next, not from them, from old teachers, extended cousins, alumni connections, all with the same thinly veiled message. Maybe you're being too harsh. They're still your parents. And then came the photos. A shared album link, unsigned, dozens of family pictures uploaded like artifacts in a museum. Me as a child at piano recitals. Birthdays, Easter brunches, all curated for sympathy. As if memories were proof of love. As if frozen smiles and posed holidays erased the years that followed. I didn't respond. I didn't delete the album either. I kept it in a folder named Evidence of Rewrite. Because that's what this was now, an attempted revision, not just of my choices, but of the past itself. They were trying to reshape the story so they could still be the benevolent figures in it. But I remembered the real story, the one no photo could capture. Like the night I was 14 and came home with a scraped knee after biking home in the rain. My mother looked up from her wine glass and said, "That's what happens when you don't plan ahead." Or the college interview I prepared for alone, because my father didn't believe in coddling. They didn't protect me. They shaped me. Yes, but not with love. With distance. With expectation. With the cold pressure of conditional belonging. And now, because I'd finally refused the mould. I was dangerous. Unpredictable. Free. Daniel knew I was unravelling things quietly. He didn't push. He gave me space, but filled it with presence. I'd wake up to fresh coffee, find my favourite song quietly playing when I entered the room. One morning, I opened my laptop to find he'd changed the lock screen. It was a quote. "You don't owe your past a place in your peace." I stared at it for a long time, because that was what this had always been about. Peace, not revenge, not retribution. Just a room in my own life where I could breathe without performing. So I started building it, quietly. I began writing again, not just journal entries or legal statements, but pieces of myself I'd hidden for years. Essays, poems, letters to no one. And one day, something strange happened. I found myself smiling for no reason. Not because something amazing had occurred, just because the quiet wasn't heavy anymore. I was walking through the farmer's market, alone, holding a bundle of tulips and fresh bread. When it hit me, I didn't feel watched, not measured, not compared, not under scrutiny. I was just living. I got home and placed the flowers in a vase by the window. The light hit them in a way that reminded me of something from childhood, a moment I'd buried. I was maybe 6 or 7, playing alone in the backyard. My mother was inside, my father gone. I remember arranging fallen petals on a stone and pretending I was making art. When I brought them inside, proud. She glanced up, lips tight. "Don't bring in mess from the yard." "Claire, that's not real art." But it was. It was mine. That night, I sat with Daniel on the couch, head resting against his shoulder. "I think I'm done waiting for them to say sorry," I said. He looked down at me. "You've known for a while they won't." "I know, but I think I kept waiting anyway. Like, maybe if I achieved enough, or acted composed enough, or didn't fight back too hard, they'd come around." He reached for my hand. "You're not responsible for their awakening." And I realised he was right. Healing doesn't come from hearing them say we were wrong. Healing comes when you stop needing it. Later that week, I received one final email from their lawyer. Not a threat this time. Just an update they had revised their wills, removed my name, No more ties. No more claims. Not even symbolic ones. I stared at the message for a while, and then, without a second thought, I hit archive, not out of anger, out of relief. Because that name, the one I was born with, the one they tried to wrap around my husband's company like a leash, it wasn't mine anymore. My name is Claire, and I get to decide what that means now. There's a strange kind of silence that follows freedom. It doesn't come with music swelling in the background or a clean-cut ending. It just arrives one day, quietly, and sits next to you. At first, you don't recognise it. You think, is this numbness? Am I dissociating again? But then you realise, no, this isn't absence. It's presence. Your own. It happened to me on a Tuesday. A completely ordinary one. Daniel had gone to a meeting, and I was alone in the apartment, folding laundry, socks, towels, one of his old hoodies, when I caught myself humming. Just humming. A silly little tune, no lyrics, no structure, something soft and repetitive, and I realised I couldn't remember the last time I'd made a sound just for myself, not to perform, not to soothe, just because it felt good. I sank down onto the carpet, a towel still in my hands, and let the weight of that moment wash over me. This was mine, this life, this quiet, this version of myself that didn't need to be validated, fixed, corrected. Later that evening, I lit candles, played old records, cooked dinner not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I made Daniel's favourite, mushroom risotto, and remembered how, years ago, my mother told me it was a peasant dish, that her guests would never accept starch as elegance. But when Daniel took the first bite, he closed his eyes like it was the finest thing he'd ever tasted. That's the difference between love and approval. Love receives. Approval demands. I used to chase approval like oxygen. It was the currency of my childhood. How I bought a few moments of tenderness. A rare compliment. The illusion of connection. But it was never stable. It ran out the moment I deviated from the script. Daniel never needed a script. He just needed truth. We finished dinner on the balcony, watching the city hum below. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we weren't protecting something. We were just being. After the dishes were done and the lights were low, he pulled out a small velvet box. My breath caught. "Don't worry," he said with a quiet smile. "I'm not proposing again." Inside was a necklace. Simple. A thin gold chain with a single charm. The letter C. "Your name," he said. "Just yours. No last name. No legacy. Just Claire." I didn't cry. I just nodded, reached out and let him clasp it around my neck. It felt weightless, like something I'd always worn, but had only now remembered. That night, I stood in the mirror, running my fingers over the charm, and I asked myself a question I'd never allowed before. What if the story wasn't about them at all? What if they were just a prologue? What if I had spent years believing I was a rejected character in their novel, when really, they were a footnote in mine? The next morning, I did something unexpected. I pulled out my old laptop, the one I hadn't touched in years, and opened the document I'd started when I was 25. It was supposed to be a memoir, but I never got past the first few pages. The title had always been what they left me. But now, I deleted it. I renamed it What I Kept, because I had. I had kept my softness, even when it was mocked. I had kept my independence, even when it cost me comfort. I had kept my name, not the one they gave me, but the one I had built, syllable by syllable, out of quiet resilience. Claire. Not the daughter of, not the wife of, just Claire. And that was enough. I didn't expect them to respond to the silence. But they did. Not with letters this time. Not with lawsuits or public claims. Just a message, short, typed, unsigned. It came through an anonymous email, but I recognized the cadence immediately. My father's style clipped, formal, like every sentence had gone through a boardroom filter before it was sent. There are things you don't understand. Decisions that were made to protect you. We hoped you would grow into clarity. Your distance has been noted. Our door is open when you are ready to return to reason. Reason. That word stuck with me. To them. Everything had always been about reason. Logic, image, perception. There was never room for feeling, for softness, for me. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Because if they saw my healing as defiance, then they never knew me to begin with. Still, the message haunted me. Not because of its content, but because I realized it didn't hurt. Not like it would have before. In the past, a message like that would have sent me spiraling. I'd have rewritten responses in my head for days, imagining confrontations, playing defense in a war I didn't start. Now it felt like background noise, a whisper from a life I had outgrown. But the ghosts weren't done with me yet. That weekend, Daniel and I attended a gala, a quiet charity event for a foundation we supported. One of those nights filled with soft jazz, clinking glasses and small talk. It was supposed to be uneventful, until I saw her, my mother, standing across the room, in navy silk, her hair swept up the way she always wore it when she wanted to command the space. For a moment, I couldn't move. I had forgotten how small I always felt in her presence, like my spine shrank by inches just being near her. But then Daniel touched my hand, and I remembered. I wasn't the same woman she remembered. She saw me too. Of course she did. Her gaze flicked toward me like a reflex, then away, like I was a glitch in the scenery. We didn't speak. She didn't approach. But later, as we left, the event organizer handed me a sealed note. It was hers. I didn't recognize you at first. You've changed. Maybe that was the point. No apology. No warmth. Just that. And I folded it without reading more, tucked it into my bag, and never opened it again. Because I had changed. But not for her. For me. The next morning, I woke up to find Daniel at the kitchen counter, his laptop open, deep in thought. I want to make some changes, he said without looking up. To the company. My heart skipped. What kind of changes structurally, ethically? I want our success to mean something real. Not just numbers, not just scale. I don't want to build something that people like your parents can ever touch. I walked over, wrapping my arms around him from behind. You're already doing that. He turned, kissed my forehead. Not without you. It hit me then. This wasn't about revenge. This was about rewriting the definition of legacy. They had always taught me that legacy was a name, a bank account, a reputation polished with curated smiles and silent dinners. But Daniel and I were building something else. Legacy as honesty, as presence, as protection. Later that day, I visited my old neighbourhood, not to reminisce, but to see it for what it really was. I drove past the house I grew up in. Same hedges, same white shutters, but it didn't feel like home. It felt like a museum. a place where I had once been on display, never truly seen. I didn't get out of the car. I just looked through the window, let the memories rise and fall, and then drove away. No tears, no longing, just forward motion. Because healing, I've learned, isn't loud. It's not a speech or a showdown. It's quiet choices made again and again until the past has no more power, until you can look at the place that broke you and feel nothing but peace. It's strange how quickly a life can become yours again once you stop asking for permission to live it. The weeks that followed the gala passed in a kind of quiet bloom. No more anonymous emails, no messages from lawyers, just space to breathe, to create, to exist without their shadow pressed against every wall. I started sleeping through the night. That may sound simple, but for me, it was revolutionary. For years, I'd lived with a kind of tension I couldn't name, waking up at 3 a.m. with my jaw clenched, my chest tight, some invisible alarm ringing that I was falling behind, even when there was nothing to chase. Now, I woke slowly, with sunlight instead of dread. It was like discovering there was music in the room the whole time, but I'd been listening to static. Daniel noticed the shift. He'd smile at me like he was seeing a new version of me he hadn't met yet. "You seem lighter," he said one morning, watching me dance barefoot in the kitchen while the coffee brewed. "I feel lighter," I replied, not because they're gone, but because I stopped carrying the version of me they created. It's hard to explain that kind of release. The moment you realise that you are not broken, just bruised in someone else's shape for too long. I had bent to fit them for years. Now I was expanding. I started working again, but differently. Not out of survival, out of purpose. Daniel and I began a foundation together. Small at first, focused on mentoring young women who had been overlooked, dismissed, disbelieved. I told my story once, quietly, to a room of 6 interns. Afterwards, one of them came up to me with tears in her eyes and said, "It's like you were telling my story, only braver." I smiled. "No, just later. Because courage doesn't always come first. Sometimes it comes last, after you've been quiet for too long, after you've run out of ways to justify someone else's silence. Sometimes the final straw is the softest one." The next day, I received a letter in the mail, handwritten. The envelope was thick, elegant, and my heart sank when I saw the handwriting. My father's, but this time, I didn't flinch. I opened it, not because I needed to hear him out, but because I needed to see it for what it was. It was short. "You've made your point. If you ever want to speak again, you know where we are. Your choices have been noted. We won't interfere further." That was it. No apology, no ownership, just a final statement. A record, a withdrawal dressed as grace. I read it once, then again, and then, very calmly, I fed it into the shredder. Because there are some doors that don't deserve to stay open, even a crack. That evening, I walked down to the lake alone. No headphones, no distractions, just the sound of my own footsteps and the wind threading through the trees. And I realised something. They hadn't broken me. They had revealed me. Because every time they pulled away, I learned how to hold myself tighter. Every time they denied me love, I learned how to create it. And now I was standing in a life they couldn't enter. Not because I locked them out, but because I finally saw that they were never meant to stay. I sat by the water until the sun dipped below the horizon. And when the air turned cold and the sky turned gold and lilac, I whispered something out loud, not to them, not to anyone else. Just to the girl I had been. You didn't need them to become whole. You just needed to come home to yourself. I didn't visit their house again, not even to say goodbye. Goodbyes, I've learned, are not always spoken to people. Sometimes, they're whispered to the version of yourself that used to wait. Wait for kindness. Wait for permission. Wait for someone to finally choose you without conditions. That version of me, she's gone. In her place is someone I never imagined I'd get to be, not fearless, but not afraid anymore. Not invincible, but finally safe in her own skin. It took months, maybe years, to reach that place. 1,000 little choices. Saying no without guilt. Saying yes without needing approval. Rewriting every rule they taught me about what it meant to be a good daughter. Because that role, that title, it came with strings. Expectations, a constant threat of being unchosen the moment I stepped out of line. And when I stopped playing it, when I chose honesty over obedience, they cut the cord. But I didn't fall. I rose. Daniel and I took a trip that spring. No headlines, no business excuse. Just the two of us. Backpacks and winding roads and a map we didn't really follow. We stayed in small towns, ate food with our hands, slept in places that didn't care about our last names. On the third night, we sat under a sky so full of stars I almost cried. I used to think peace would feel like a clean slate. I told him. He tilted his head. And now I think it feels more like keeping the story, but refusing to let the worst parts narrate it. He nodded slowly. You know, I never wanted to rescue you. Claire. I looked at him, startled. I know. I wanted to stand with you. That's different. I leaned into him and watched the stars, thinking about how long I'd lived waiting to be seen, only to realise I had to first see myself. We returned home with new energy, not recharged, reborn. I started volunteering, speaking, sharing, not the polished version of my story, but the real one, the kind with contradictions and bruises and no neat bow. One day, after a talk at a college mentorship program, a girl maybe 19 or 20 approached me. She wore oversized sleeves and carried a notebook like armor. She said, "How did you stop needing their love?" I paused, then answered, "I didn't. I just stopped needing it to survive. Because love withheld isn't always the absence of love. Sometimes it's control dressed up as care. And when I stopped calling that love, everything changed." Later that month, I received a message from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. She said, "They told the family you cut them off for money, that you became greedy." I stared at the screen for a long time before replying, "No, I cut them off because they only remembered I existed because of money." She didn't respond, and I didn't care. Because truth doesn't require a chorus. It just requires you to stand in it. That night, Daniel and I walked through the city holding hands. The lights buzzed, people passed, life unfolded, and I thought, this is mine. Not borrowed, not performed, mine. Not because I earned it through perfection, but because I finally believed I deserved it without being perfect. At home, I took off my shoes, turned on music, and danced the same way I did when I was 6, placing petals on stones, calling it art. No one dismissed it this time. No one told me to be quieter, because no one had that power anymore. I did, and I chose joy. Closure doesn't always come with an apology. Sometimes it arrives in the silence that follows after you stop checking your phone, after you stop waiting for the letter, the voicemail, the last-ditch apology that you once believed would fix everything. It was around late summer when I realised I hadn't thought about them in days, not because I was forcing myself to forget, but because life had finally grown so full, so present, that there was no room left for what used to hurt. Daniel and I were finalising the Foundation's next initiative, a programme for women rebuilding their lives after being emotionally cut off by family, survivors of manipulation, control, conditional love. I shared my story once in a recorded video. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't list everything they'd done. I didn't name them. I just said this: there is a grief in realising your parents may never become the people you hoped they were, but there is also a freedom, because once you accept that, you stop begging, and you start building. The messages that came afterwards stunned me. Hundreds of women saying things like, "I didn't know I was allowed to grieve them while they were still alive. You put words to what I've lived in silence. I thought I was the only one, and I understood. Because the wound that cuts the deepest is the one you're told doesn't exist. When you cry and they say, you're too sensitive. When you pull away and they say, you're ungrateful. When you try to explain and they twist it into an attack. That's what emotional betrayal feels like. Not a wound you can point to, but a kind of internal erosion. I had lived most of my life thinking the pain was proof I was flawed. Now, I knew it was proof I had survived. I received one final gift in the mail that month, from my aunt, a small wooden frame. Inside it, a photo of me at around 8 years old, hair messy, hands covered in paint, smiling wide at a splatter of colour I'd made on a canvas. Taped to the back was a note. She was always in there. I'm glad you found her again. I hung it on my office wall, not for nostalgia, for truth, because that little girl, the one who was told to be smaller, quieter, easier, had waited long enough. Now, I lived for her. One evening, Daniel and I walked through the park, hand in hand, the golden hour turning the leaves into flames. There were children running ahead of us, laughter echoing down the path. He looked over at me. Have you thought about it? He asked gently. About becoming parents, I stopped walking. Not because the idea scared me, but because I realised it didn't. I used to think I'd never be ready, I said quietly, that I'd just pass it all on, that I'd become them. He waited, but now I think maybe the best thing I could do is become the parent I always needed. He smiled. You already are, every day, and maybe that's the final layer of healing. Not revenge, not even peace, but legacy. Not the kind they tried to claim, the kind I created from the ashes. A life of my choosing, a voice I no longer silence, a name I say without shame. Claire, no longer a daughter begging to belong. Now a woman who finally does. It's a strange thing, the end of a story you never thought would close. There's no applause, no dramatic confrontation, no camera zooming in as the villain realises what they've lost. There's just life, unfolding, moving, healing, quietly. The last message I ever received from them came a month after the Foundation launched its first national programme. We were in the papers. My name was mentioned. Not for drama, not for scandal, but for work that meant something. I was walking home, leaves crunching beneath my feet, the autumn air crisp with a kind of promise. And there it was, a single text, from a number I hadn't deleted, but never used. We saw the article. We hope this means you're doing well. We're still here if you want to reconnect. It didn't sting. It didn't make my heart race. It made me grateful, not for the message, for the clarity, because I no longer needed them to see me. I had already seen myself, and what I saw was someone who had climbed out of a story written by other people, who had rewritten it in her own hand, carefully, painfully, truthfully. I didn't reply, not out of bitterness, but because the silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It was full of everything I had learned, built, and become. The next morning, I stood by the window with my tea, sunlight pouring in across the kitchen. Daniel was reading beside me, feet tucked beneath him, soft music playing in the background. There was nothing remarkable about the moment, and yet it was everything I had fought for. A life without performance, a morning without fear, a home that didn't feel like a negotiation. Sometimes I wonder what they tell people about me now. I imagine the story shifts depending on the room. In some versions, I'm the ungrateful daughter. In others, I'm lost, rebellious, misled. It doesn't matter, because the only version that matters is the one I live. And in this version, I am not a cautionary tale. I am a beginning. I've learned that the most powerful form of revenge isn't revenge at all. It's building a life so whole, so grounded, so deeply yours, that it doesn't leave room for their echo. It's waking up each day and knowing that you are not waiting anymore, not for approval, not for closure, not for the version of them that never came. I sometimes walk past those 2 chairs I saved at my wedding. I kept them, not as a shrine, as a reminder of who didn't show up and what I still became without them. A wife, a founder, a survivor, a woman who gave herself permission to be enough, without applause, without permission, without apology. So, if you're listening, if you're somewhere on your own path, wondering if cutting them off makes you cruel, it doesn't. It makes you free, and you'll know you've made it, not when the pain disappears, but when you wake up one day, look in the mirror, and see someone you finally recognize, someone you fought for, someone you chose, someone who stayed